Good. Hi, my name is Sebastian Moser, and I work for a company called Adaptive Financial Consulting. I will talk about what we do in just a little moment, but first, let me set the scene. So you start your new project. You get together with your UI developers. You research the latest and greatest technologies, packages, architectures, and you npm install a whole bunch of them. You get an early UX mock, and you start working towards your POC. Somewhere, the backend team are doing the same. Things are pretty good. Eventually, though, you have to integrate the backend and the front end. You realize that there were some misunderstandings, the APIs are actually a bit different. It's pretty painful, but you make it work. Somewhere, the QA team are doing some testing and writing some automation tests. Eventually, you get to an internal release, you get some feedback, you need to refactor the UI a bit, you add more features, you run into regressions, and things start to slow down. We like to call this the cliff of complexity. Every project is always fun and easy in the beginning, but as complexity increases, progress slowly starts to slow down and eventually crawls to a halt. And you'll get a very frustrated product owner who says, why is it not like it was in the beginning? That's frustrating. I want to talk to you today about what we do on our projects to ensure a sustainable success and sustainable progress in the long term. But why should you listen to me? Well, the thing is, we've done this before many, many times. We've been around for 10 years. In that time, we've done more than 60 projects that have some kind of a web component. We have more than 70 web developers in 4 different offices. And we specialize in financial applications and specifically trading platforms. Our projects usually look something like this. Look at that algo form on the right, for example. Look at all those dozens of form fields. Think of all the state permutations that you need to create in order to test every aspect of this. I mean, sure, you probably have tests for your drop-down and your step-up widgets. You might even be testing some of the happy paths through that project. But this form has really complex validation logic, and covering all of it is incredibly hard. And we're not talking even about WebSocket disruptions, timeouts, that kind of stuff. Or look at that OpenFin workflow on the left. Does your test suite cover multi-window workflows, like at all? And what do you do if one of those widgets is actually owned by a different team? Can you refactor any of this safely? The reality is financial applications are really, really hard, and harder than a lot of other problems that people face in different industries. We don't build a little e-commerce site with a couple of products on a page that's nice and static. We work with real-time data from different sources using WebSockets, and to be honest, we often test the limits of what web technologies can do. And the only way to make this work is to build better technology to help us build that technology. OpenFin are realizing this too, and they are actually working on something called OpenFin automation tools to specifically help with testing OpenFin applications, and in particular multi-window workflows, which is really exciting, and we started implementing this on internal projects to simplify our tests and make them better. But let me show you what we built internally to make our projects more successful. So when we start a project, we define its features in interfaces and in services in a schema language. Let's say we build a trading service. We need a way to stream orders and submit trades. Looks like this. Like, that's literally what it looks like. Simple so far, right? And then we do something really cool. We take that schema and we automatically generate a whole domain service layer, both on the UI side in TypeScript and on the backend side in Java or .NET, depending on the projects. And this pretty much takes care of all the plumbing that we spend at least 2 months on every single project that we do. It's just there, out of the box. And that's really useful because as a web developer myself, I don't want to write message layers, request and response protocols. That's not interesting. I want to put a list of orders onto my screen. And the fact that there is a WebSocket at all is completely irrelevant. I don't engage with that at all. I don't ever deal with a WebSocket. All I'm dealing with is layers that are built on top of that take care of all the hard problems. That lets me build business value from day one. Now, for REST APIs, a lot of these services that make it easier to build and to test and all of these wrappers exist. But for financial applications with streaming data, fire and forget, request response, we've yet to find anything that actually works really well. And now imagine we have a little trading system and we want to change the schema. Well, the build system makes sure that we stay in sync because both TypeScript and Java or .NET would complain if it didn't. No more coordination effort. That best case scenario, it takes a lot of time, and worst case scenario doesn't work anyway. And we can refactor our applications with confidence. But then we realized it's still kind of frustrating as developers to have to run the backend on our computers to actually be able to test our software. And that's really not very fun. So we started building a ad hoc stub backend in Node.js. This is highly realistic. It uses the same communications as our actual backend users. And it allows us to start work on the UI immediately when we start the project. We don't have to wait for the backend anymore. We actually started kind of flipping the process around these days, and we built the UI before the backend, because backend developers can then use the front end to test the stuff, which is way more fun to do. And not having to wait for the backend to start working on the front end really contracts our project timelines. And of course, we started using this for tests too. But, could we use multiple of these to test specific problems? So we started creating just a lot of these stub backends to test very specific, very narrow problems. This gives us the ultimate flexibility. Like, if we want to test the WebSocket being slow, we create a custom backend where the WebSocket is literally being slow, rather than having to faff around in some mock system somewhere. And suddenly, your unhappy paths can actually be tested, even the worst of them, that otherwise you probably would just kind of hope don't happen too much. And we never write any tests for WebSocket reconnecting or any of that stuff, because that is taken care of by our platform team who built this code generation technology in the first place. And we have complete trust in that. And that is what it looks like when we write a test. Those 5 highlighted lines of code, that's our mock server. And that's an actual Node.js mock server that's running in the background that will be created on demand. And if you think about that algo form that I showed you in the beginning, our tests cover that comprehensively, like everything. Now, don't get me wrong, that is still a lot of code and a lot of tests, but these tests are readable and understandable. And that's how it should be. Instead of outsourcing QA to different teams, we integrate it into our core development workflow. We lower the bar to writing automation tests so much that we just write automation tests for every single story and for every single bug. And that means that we have documentation in the code, and that documentation is always up to date. That's great to refer to if years down the line you're trying to understand some detailed nuance about a feature, But it's also really useful for onboarding new developers. Once they understand how your tests work, they can figure out anything. And our ad hoc backends allow us to test even the gnarliest of bugs pretty easily. Most importantly, though, and that's really key, we don't have to rely on incomplete regression packs or long manual QA cycles in our development process. We have an app that's always tested and always stable, and we never run into that cliff of complexity. And this is kind of what it looks like. And just to give you an example, recently on one of our more complex projects, we literally swapped out Material UI for Tailwind, and it just worked. Like, there was no problem. It's pretty amazing, to be honest. And it gets us that warm feeling from the start of the project, but throughout the project. If this looks at all interesting to you, please come find us at a booth later, and let's have a chat. I will leave my details here, and thank you very much for listening.